My name is Maya Rostova. I am 34 years old, and I was exactly 6 weeks into the fragile, exhausting new world of motherhood with my daughter, Lily, when the entire architecture of my life was violently reduced to rubble while I lay in a trauma unit in Millfield, Ohio. I was a senior financial analyst at a massive corporation downtown, a person who spent her entire professional existence inside complex, unfeeling spreadsheets, where numbers are pure and honest and don't lie to your face, unlike some people. But standing calm inside the boardroom was very different than facing my family. Lying in that sterile bed with 3 violently broken ribs, a dangerously punctured lung, and a heavy, foreign cast encasing my right arm from a massive truck collision, I quickly learned exactly what my family truly thought of my life or death worth. My husband, David, was away on a highly critical business trip in Chicago, absolutely stranded and at least 6 agonizing hours away from physically getting home. Somebody, anybody, had to care for my tiny 6-week-old infant that terrifying night, and my own mother, Eleanor, lived a mere 20 minutes away from the emergency room. Her answer, which David delivered to me over speakerphone while his voice crackled with suppressed rage, was exactly one cold, devastating sentence. "Please, David." She had actually sighed into the phone, her voice sounding incredibly theatrical and exhausted. "You genuinely need to understand that your sister, Chloe, never, ever seems to have these inconvenient emergencies." My younger sister, Chloe, was currently sunbathing on a luxury yacht sailing through the warm Mediterranean Sea on our family's dime. My mother, it tragically turned out later, was sitting comfortably in front of a blinking, chaotic slot machine at a nearby casino, entirely unwilling to leave her game. What I did from that cold hospital bed, with my precious daughter 40 minutes away in the careful hands of an emergency night nurse and my left hand free, in the course of the next 3 terrifying minutes, effectively stopped exactly 9 long, bleeding years of secret financial manipulation and saved me exactly $486,000. But the absolute truth is, the money isn't even the part that completely broke them. The absolute part that permanently destroyed their perfect, fragile illusion of family investment walked directly through my hospital door exactly 3 hours later. A tired, frail old man with weathered hands carrying a worn manila folder that had brittle rubber bands. And he said something entirely, utterly unexpected, something that absolutely none of them had ever expected to hear spoken out loud in their entire narcissistic lives. "Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the only place where the quiet, unshakable, reliable people finally decide to close the accounts for good." If someone in your personal life has ever treated your unwavering steadiness as their own personal, endless blank check, this story is specifically for you. Drop a comment below and tell me who genuinely showed up for you when you hit rock bottom. And please be sure to subscribe to the channel, because this entire story is going to stay with you long after the video is over. I desperately need to take you back to that phone call, because that is exactly where the absolute nightmare officially begins for me. I slowly came up out of the heavy, suffocating anesthesia in a curtained, chaotic bay in the emergency room. And the very first thing I felt was the unnatural, suffocating weight of the thick cast on my right arm, accompanied by the tight plastic medical ID band uncomfortably cinched around my left wrist. A tired, busy nurse was hovering over me, repeating my name over and over again like she had already said it multiple times while I was entirely under. My broken, violently throbbing ribs felt with every shallow breath exactly as if someone had physically, deliberately parked a massive, heavy sedan directly on my chest. David was on speakerphone, his voice crackling from the phone, resting on the thin hospital pillow beside my head, and he was doing that incredibly flat, overly careful thing he always does when he is absolutely terrified but desperately trying not to let it show. "Maya," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly over the line. "The evening sitter absolutely, positively cannot stay a single minute past 11 o'clock tonight. I called your mom." I knew the devastating, chilling answer long before his mouth ever forced the brutal words out. "She won't come," he finally admitted, his voice full of pain. There was a heavy, agonizing pause over the line, and right behind his hushed, careful words, I could hear it, faint, distant, but completely unmistakable. The electronic, chaotic chime and artificial chatter of a bustling casino slot floor. That specific, celebratory little fanfare a cheat machine plays when it accidentally pays out some money. My own mother was comfortably sitting at the Rivers Casino with her neighborhood girlfriends, casually throwing away thousands. She had confidently told David that she simply couldn't drive over to the house because she was critically busy cat-sitting while my sister Chloe was enjoying her expensive luxury cruise. A cat. My fragile, 6-week-old daughter desperately needed someone to protect her and keep her alive for the night, and my mother's final answer was a neighbor's cat. I want you to understand something incredibly, profoundly important right now. I did not cry in that hospital bed. Everyone always expects the broken woman lying in the trauma unit to completely fall apart, to sob and scream at the sheer injustice of it all. But I didn't shed a single, solitary tear. I just stared blankly at the plastic band cutting into my wrist, feeling absolutely nothing but ice. Then I slowly reached over with my uninjured, shaking left hand and pulled my glowing phone off the metal tray table. I had a massive, calculating amount of things to aggressively take care of, and I was dangerously, terrifyingly good at taking care of complex, chaotic things that had, ironically, always been the core of the problem. You genuinely need to understand exactly who I was before that terrifying night, because it perfectly explains exactly why my family treated me the same way a running faucet treats an empty glass. I grew up in a cramped, rented duplex in a rough neighborhood where the heating system only worked when it miraculously felt like it. I paid for my entire community college tuition by working brutal, exhausting closing shifts at a local grocery store, eventually transferred on a strict academic scholarship, and violently clawed my way into an elite corporate finance program that absolutely nobody in my uneducated family even remotely understood. By the time I turned 30, I was a highly respected senior financial analyst at a massive Fortune 500 company downtown. The exact person the unfeeling executives put in the boardroom when the complex numbers simply had to be perfectly, undeniably right. I spent my entire professional existence reading complex spreadsheets for a living, and the beautiful thing about numbers is that they absolutely do not have emotional favorites, and they never ever lie to your face, which is significantly more than I could possibly say for some of my own blood relatives. David and I married when we were 26 and consciously decided to wait on having kids, partly because we genuinely wanted to build a financial foundation, but mostly because there was always some sudden, dramatic financial crisis that my family needed me to fix first. We lived completely, quietly below our means in a very quiet, unassuming way that absolutely nobody noticed. 2 decent incomes, 1 reliable used car, absolutely 0 suffocating debt. That strict financial discipline is the absolute only reason that what I am about to tell you was even mathematically possible. For 9 long, exhausting years, I had been quietly, faithfully sending my parents exactly $4,500 on the first of every single month. I never once said that massive number out loud to anyone, not to my supportive husband, not to my spoiled sister, not to a single living soul. I desperately told myself it was purely for my father's worsening, critical heart condition and to help cover their struggling mortgage. I endlessly told myself that I was simply the only person in the family steady enough and successful enough to carry the heavy financial burden. And over time, being the steady one had become its own twisted, suffocating kind of identity that I clung to desperately. I am telling you this humiliating, naked truth right now, so you fully understand my mindset. I wasn't just young and naive. I was overly responsible to the absolute point of total self-erasure. There's a massive, terrifying difference between the two, and lying in that cold bed that night, I finally, brutally learned it. The very first thing I did in that hospital room was absolutely not seek petty, immediate revenge. The very first thing I did was efficiently solve the actual, immediate, real-world problem, because that is exactly what I have been trained to do. Using only my left thumb, I quickly pulled up the emergency contact number for an elite, highly licensed overnight care agency that David and I had strictly, ruthlessly vetted months before Lily was born, but had never actually ended up using. A professional woman answered my call on the second ring. I coldly gave her my name, my exact medical situation, and my home address in exactly 9 clear, precise sentences, speaking as calm and unfeeling as a sunny Tuesday afternoon presentation. I need an experienced night nurse for a 6-week-old infant tonight, starting right now, I commanded. She politely asked if the baby was medically stable, to which I replied, "She is absolutely perfect. I am the one trapped in the hospital." Exactly 40 minutes later, an incredibly kind, professional nurse let herself into my dark house using the security code David had provided over the phone, thoroughly washed her hands, and texted me a beautiful, high-resolution photo of Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib, her tiny fist pressed softly against her cheek. I stared at that glowing photo for a very long, quiet time. The exhausted ER nurse, standing beside my bed, watched me slowly set the phone down and asked gently if I had any family members who could come sit with me and hold my hand. "It is completely handled," I replied in a flat voice. "What is next?" She blinked at me in confusion. People always blink and process when you absolutely refuse to perform the hysterical breakdown they're entirely braced for. I wasn't being emotionally cold. I was simply triaging my chaotic life the exact way you do when you have spent your entire existence being the absolute only functioning adult in a room completely full of supposed adults. My precious daughter was safe, warm, and carefully watched. My panicked husband was currently in the air, rushing home to me. My shattered ribs would eventually knit themselves back together. There was exactly one monumental, toxic item left on my mental list that night. One massive burden I had silently carried for 9 long years and never once allowed myself to actually examine. And now my left hand was free. The hospital room was quiet, and my mind was terrifyingly, brutally clear. I slowly opened my secure banking application. The blue login screen glowed in the dark, curtain bay like a small, cold moon illuminating my decisions. Inside the app, there is a specific hidden screen called Recurring Transfers, and I had exactly 4 of them actively running. I knew them by heart, the exact same way a person knows the shape of a painful scar on their body. The first automated transfer was neatly labeled Mom and Dad, $2,000 a month. The second one simply said, "Home, $1,000 for the massive mortgage I genuinely believed I was helping them keep afloat so they didn't lose their house." The third read, "Dad Medical, $900. And the fourth, the one that always stung, just said, "Chloe Support, $500. $4,000. $500 leaving my account on the first of every single month for 108 consecutive months. I had frantically set the very first one up when I was only 25 years old, the terrifying night my father had called me absolutely sobbing about a crushing, unexpected hospital bill. And I had deliberately, purposefully never let myself actually add up the monumental total over the years, because looking at the final number felt exactly like opening a dark door I could never walk back through. But that night, staring at the ceiling, I finally made myself look at the truth. The banking app did the ruthless math without flinching or offering excuses. $486,000. Almost $500,000 completely gone out of my life. Drained away one quiet, automated payment at a time, all while my arrogant mother proudly told our extended relatives that they magically managed on their own without any help. I firmly pressed cancel on the very first transfer. A bright green checkmark appeared, followed by a simple line of text that I will remember clearly until the day I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed the second one. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. For simple, silent taps on a glass screen. It took maybe 20 seconds in total, and 9 long years of financial bleeding simply stopped, exactly the way a faucet stops when you finally turn the heavy handle. I felt absolutely no grand triumph and no devastating grief, just a strange, flat, absolute clarity, exactly like the profound moment a massive corporate spreadsheet finally balances perfectly. Then, just as I was about to close the application and try to sleep, my tired eyes suddenly snagged on something deeply suspicious buried in the transaction history, a section I had never bothered to scroll through before. It was a single, massive line item, completely buried under the dad medical label from exactly 2 years back. It read, Loan C, $40,000. My sister's initial, C for Chloe. Not my sick father's critical, life-saving heart surgery. Chloe. I locked the phone screen and lay there in the absolute dark, listening to the medical monitor rhythmically count my steady heartbeats. And I forced myself to sit in the darkness with the one agonizing question I had completely avoided for 9 years. Why had I done it? The incredibly easy answer, the pathetic one that strangers would probably offer, is that I was just a weak, desperate pushover begging for my family's love. That answer is fundamentally entirely wrong. And if you have ever been cursed with being the dependable one in a broken family, you already know exactly why I did it. I did it because, somewhere along the exhausting way, I had unconsciously decided that being desperately needed was exactly the same thing as being safe and loved. I thought that if I was the absolute load-bearing wall holding the entire house up, no one could ever easily remove me or throw me away. My sharp, observant grandmother inherently understood that tragic flaw about me long before I did. Her name was Elizabeth Rostova, my father's mother, a tall, incredibly flinty, no-nonsense woman who always smelled faintly of strong black coffee and old machine oil, and who absolutely never once had to raise her voice to get an entire room's undivided attention. The quiet year before she passed away, she firmly took my hand at the Thanksgiving dinner table, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered, "Somebody has to carefully watch this family's money, Maya, and your father absolutely won't do it, so it will simply have to be you." I naively thought she meant I should be generous and caring. I deeply think now that she actually meant something much closer to be incredibly vigilant, ruthless, and protect yourself. Elizabeth passed away last spring, slipping away quietly in her sleep, and I had been entirely too buried in a difficult, exhausting new pregnancy and a demanding financial quarter at work to ask what exactly she had left behind or to whom she had left it. I blindly assumed my mother had responsibly handled the estate, the exact same way I blindly assumed my hard-earned money was actually buying my sick father's critical medicine. I had spent an entire lifetime foolishly assuming the absolute best about toxic people who had never once earned my trust, and I had stupidly called that toxic assumption love. Lying in that cold hospital bed, with my precious daughter 40 minutes away in a complete stranger's incredibly careful hands, I finally understood the truth. I had been blindly funding a beautiful, fictional story about my family, not the actual, broken family itself. The actual family had just casually chosen a cat over my newborn. David called me again from his miserable, delayed layover at the airport, and this time he angrily told me absolutely everything my mother had said, repeating it word for brutal, unforgivable word because he knew my analytical mind would want the exact data. He had frantically called her at 9 o'clock, breathlessly explaining that I was being rushed into emergency surgery and that the baby desperately needed someone familiar, and he begged her to please just drive the 20 minutes to our house. She had sighed heavily into the phone, he said, that long, theatrical, exhausted sigh she perfectly uses to play the victim, and she coldly told him that she really couldn't make it. She complained that Chloe was finally getting her dream vacation on a cruise, and that someone absolutely had to stay and watch the cat. And besides, she added casually, Maya always miraculously lands on her feet. Then she had delivered the killing blow, the line that David will never forget. "Please, David, your sister never seems to have these inconvenient emergencies." She said it exactly as if the massive delivery truck that violently hit my car had politely checked my family ranking before running the red light. She said it exactly as if my daughter's terrifying first night without her mother could simply wait on pause until a luxury Caribbean cruise was completely over. David's voice physically cracked with rage and sorrow while telling me the story, and I simply told him to breathe. I calmly assured him that Lily was perfectly fine, that I was completely stable, and that he just needed to get on his plane and come home. After we finally hung up, I slowly opened Instagram, an app one almost never even look at, and there was Chloe's vibrant story sitting right at the absolute top of my feed. It was a glistening, highly edited video reel showing a luxurious turquoise pool deck, a fancy coconut drink with a tiny umbrella, and a glowing caption that read, "Living my absolute best life, finally." My sister, 29 years old, an aspiring, pathetic social media influencer with barely 11,000 followers and a massive $500 monthly allowance that she genuinely thought magically appeared from the universe itself. I didn't leave a bitter comment on her post. I didn't scream furiously into the dark hospital room. Instead, I calmly opened my text messages and typed 3 simple, deliberate words to a specific contact I almost never used. A contact saved simply as Aunt Sarah. Sarah was my father's older sister, the quiet woman from the group lunch. I wrote, "We should really talk." The 3 gray typing dots appeared on the screen almost immediately, exactly as if she had been sitting in the dark waiting 9 long years for that exact text message to arrive. And honestly, maybe she actually had been. I fully expected Aunt Sarah to write a long, careful message back. Instead, my phone suddenly lit up brightly with an incoming FaceTime call from the absolute middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And it was Chloe. I answered the call using my good left hand, keeping my bruised face half buried in the deep shadow of the hospital bay. She completely failed to notice the sterile hospital ceiling behind my head. She didn't notice the massive white cast on my arm. She didn't even bother to ask why I was lying down in the dark at midnight. "Maya, oh my God, finally!" She whined over the line, holding the phone entirely too close to her face, so I got a massive, high-definition tour of her peeling, sunburned nose. My credit card literally just got declined at the luxury spa on the ship, like it was so incredibly humiliating, Maya. I waited in absolute, freezing silence. She immediately filled the void the exact way she always does, rambling nervously. "Mom always told me the family account covers my trips. Did you accidentally touch something you shouldn't have?" And there it was, laid completely, disgustingly bare. The entire, massive architecture of the lie delivered in one simple, ignorant sentence. The family account. My foolish sister genuinely, entirely believed that the $500 a month magically appeared from some communal, bottomless Harper family treasury, a magical financial well that our brilliant mother flawlessly managed. She had absolutely no idea the money came directly from my bleeding bank account, because my manipulative mother had spent 9 years meticulously making absolutely sure she didn't know the truth. I looked at her pixelated face and asked her evenly if she even knew that I had been in a severe car accident and was in the hospital. "Wait, what? Are you seriously being dramatic right now?" She scoffed, actually rolling her eyes. Behind her on the deck, a loud, cheerful steel drum band started playing tropical music. "Can you please just quickly fix the card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow morning, and I have a massive photo shoot planned." A photo shoot? I told her in a deadpan voice that I would absolutely look into it, which was entirely true, and that I had to go, which was also true. I hung up the phone before she could even utter another complaint about her humiliation, and I lay in the dark with the cheerful sound of the steel drums still ringing mockingly in my ears. My sister wasn't intentionally cruel, not exactly. She was something almost infinitely worse. She was a completely blind person who had never, ever once been asked to imagine that the magic well actually had a bottom, simply because absolutely no one had ever let her see who was exhausting themselves carrying the heavy bucket. The next morning, the nurses finally moved me from the ER to a regular, quiet room, and that is exactly when the massive family group text started buzzing relentlessly on the plastic tray table. I was included in a massive chain called the Harper Family, filled with a dozen distant relatives, mostly silent, judgmental aunts. I rarely ever bothered to open it, but the screen kept flashing brightly, and against my absolute better judgment, I tapped into the chat. My mother had been incredibly busy playing the victim. She had posted a massive, dramatic paragraph an hour earlier that began, I am absolutely heartbroken to announce that Maya is being incredibly dramatic again, and she has violently cut her poor, struggling parents off financially out of pure, malicious spite. She wrote a heartbreaking tale about how my father's health was incredibly fragile, crying that they had generously given me absolutely everything I have, and sobbing that she simply didn't know how she would possibly cover his life-saving medicine now. Then, she deliberately added a line specifically for the audience. We have always proudly managed on our own, but this sudden betrayal is just so cruel. There it was again. The exact same screen glowing brightly with the exact same massive lie. Except this time, it wasn't just hiding in my private banking app. It was being performed on a public stage for a sympathetic audience. We manage on our own. The delusional woman had spoken that exact sentence to gullible relatives for 9 long years, all while secretly cashing my massive transfers on the first of every single month. My judgmental Aunt Vivian had already replied to the group with 3 broken heart emojis and the venomous words, "Shame on her, maliciously kicking a sick, dying man when he is already down." A distant cousin blindly sent a praying hands emoji. Absolutely nobody in that toxic chat knew the actual truth, because the truth had absolutely never been allowed to step foot in the room. I tightly held the glowing phone, and I felt the old, desperate reflex violently rise in my throat, the burning urge to immediately explain myself, to soften the blow, to magically manage everyone's fragile feelings the exact way I had managed absolutely everything else in my life. I slowly set the phone face down on the table instead. Desperately explaining myself was the old Maya, the brand new Maya, the one the massive delivery truck had apparently just installed in my brain. Wanted something infinitely colder, sharper, and much more precise. The new me desperately wanted the hard numbers presented in the room, and I knew precisely where to find them. Aunt Sarah arrived at the hospital precisely at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, casting a pale, gray light through the thin blinds of my recovery room. She walked in wearing a sensible tan trench coat, holding a scuffed black leather briefcase and a massive cup of black coffee. Sarah was my father's older sister, a retired forensic accountant who had spent 35 years auditing corrupt state agencies. She possessed the absolute coldest, most terrifyingly analytical stare I have ever seen on a human being, and for the first time in my life, that terrifying stare was entirely, fiercely on my side. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't ask about my broken ribs. She simply pulled a plastic visitor's chair directly up to my bed, popped the brass latches on her briefcase, and pulled out a thick, violently overstuffed manila folder bound with thick rubber bands. "Your grandmother, Elizabeth, knew exactly what Eleanor was doing," Sarah stated, her voice barely above a whisper, slicing right through the quiet hum of the medical machines. "Elizabeth legally named me the sole executor of her estate because she completely, fundamentally distrusted your mother with money. And since Elizabeth passed away last year, I have been quietly, legally monitoring Arthur and Eleanor's joint financial accounts to finalize the estate taxes." She carefully unwound the rubber bands and laid a massive stack of highlighted bank statements directly on my plastic tray table. "Maya, I saw the massive monthly transfers coming in from your account. $4,500 every single month. I assumed, perhaps foolishly, that you knew exactly where it was actually going. But after reading Eleanor's ridiculous, hysterical group chat message last night about being cut off, I immediately knew you were completely in the dark." I stared at the pristine, printed spreadsheets. She told me Dad's heart condition required expensive out-of-pocket specialists. I rasped, my throat still incredibly dry from the anesthesia. She told me the house mortgage was dangerously underwater. Aunt Sarah let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held absolutely zero humor. "Your father's heart condition is completely 100% covered by his premium union pension insurance. He pays a $20 copay for his medication, and their house mortgage was entirely paid off by your grandfather 12 years ago." She leaned forward, tapping a manicured fingernail against a column of highlighted red numbers. Here is the absolute, unvarnished truth, Maya. Your mother has a severe, undocumented gambling addiction. She spends roughly 3 to 4 days a week at Rivers Casino. And whatever she doesn't lose into a slot machine, she directly funnels into Chloe's checking account to fund this ridiculous influencer lifestyle so Chloe never has to get a real job. Sarah flipped to the second page. Your $486,000 didn't save your father's life. It bought thousands of spins on a digital roulette wheel, and it bought luxury Caribbean cruises for a 29-year-old woman who refuses to work. I sat in the hospital bed, the heavy cast on my arm resting on the blankets, and I felt the entire foundational reality of my past decade violently shatter into pieces. The crushing guilt I had carried, the agonizing fear that if I missed a single payment, my father would physically die or lose his home, was entirely manufactured. It was a brilliantly constructed, highly lucrative hostage situation, and I had been faithfully paying the massive ransom for 9 years. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at Aunt Sarah, the numbers perfectly aligning in my brain, and I asked her one simple, chilling question. Does my father know? Sarah slowly shook her head, her eyes softening just a fraction. Arthur is a willfully blind, passive man. Eleanor handles all the mail, all the accounts, all the passwords. He knows you occasionally help out with small gifts, but if he knew the actual, terrifying dollar amount, or what his wife was truly doing with it, it would absolutely destroy him. Then I guess it is time to destroy the illusion, I said coldly. Sarah gave me a tight, fierce nod, handed me a complete, printed copy of the forensic accounting file, and quietly left the room just as David finally rushed through the hospital doors, his suitcase still in his hand, his face pale with terror. When David wrapped his arms carefully around my uninjured side, burying his face in my neck, I finally let out a long, shuddering breath. I told him absolutely everything. I showed him the folder. My sweet, patient, calm husband went dangerously, terrifyingly still. He didn't yell. He just looked at the exact numbers, looked at my heavily bruised face, and coldly stated, "They are absolutely never coming near our daughter. Ever." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. David brought me home from the hospital, and we immediately instituted an absolute, unbreakable communication blackout. I blocked my mother, I blocked Chloe, and I blocked the toxic family group chat. I didn't answer a single text, email, or phone call. In my mother's deeply narcissistic, twisted mind, she genuinely believed she was currently winning a massive game of chicken. She assumed I was sitting at home, crippled by immense guilt, overwhelmed by my newborn, and desperately missing her approval. She blindly assumed that the sudden stoppage of the money was just a temporary, emotional tantrum caused by the car accident, and that if she just played the victim loudly enough, I would eventually crawl back and open my wallet. I wasn't crawling. I was aggressively, meticulously preparing. I sat at my massive kitchen island with my left hand, a heavy highlighter, and Aunt Sarah's flawless forensic file, and I built an impenetrable, bulletproof financial fortress. Exactly 14 days after the accident, the silence finally broke. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang sharply. I was sitting at the kitchen table, holding my beautiful, sleeping daughter against my chest, my right arm still suspended in its heavy sling. David was working quietly in his home office down the hall. I looked at the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on my front porch was my mother, Eleanor, wearing her expensive, beige cashmere coat. Standing slightly behind her, looking incredibly uncomfortable and confused, was my father, Arthur, and leaning against the porch railing, aggressively texting on her glowing phone, was Chloe. They hadn't called. They hadn't asked if I was physically well enough for visitors. They had simply ambushed my home, expecting a dramatic surrender. "Let them in," I called out to David. He emerged from his office, his jaw set so tightly I thought his teeth might crack, and he walked to the front door, pulling it wide open. Eleanor immediately swept into the house, exactly like a conquering general. She didn't look at the heavy cast on my arm. She didn't look at her beautiful, sleeping newborn granddaughter resting against my chest. She marched directly to the kitchen island, dropped her heavy designer purse onto the granite, and pulled out a neatly folded piece of expensive, embossed stationery. "Well, Maya," she announced, using her loud, theatrical, long-suffering mother voice, "we have given you 2 full weeks to cool down from your little emotional outburst. Your father and I are willing to forgive this horrible, malicious financial betrayal, but we need to strictly discuss the new terms of your support." David stepped up and stood directly behind my chair, crossing his arms over his chest like a silent, immovable wall. Arthur lingered awkwardly near the hallway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. Chloe simply slumped against the kitchen counter, loudly sighing exactly as if my severe car accident was a massive personal inconvenience to her day. "Terms," I repeated, my voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth or fear. "You brought terms." "I brought a list of necessary damages," Eleanor corrected sharply, unfolding the heavy paper. "Since you selfishly froze the accounts, I have incurred severe, deeply embarrassing late fees. Furthermore, your sister's cruise was completely ruined by your dramatic phone call, and she deserves compensation for her emotional distress." She began to dramatically read from her blue ink list. "Immediate reinstatement of the $4,500 monthly transfer. A one-time penalty payment of $10,000 to cover our mounting stress and late fees. And you will entirely pay off Chloe's current visa balance of $12,000, since you maliciously cut her off mid-vacation." She slapped the paper down on the granite counter. "That is the absolute bare minimum for this family to forgive you, Maya." I sat in the quiet kitchen and stared at her. I really, truly looked at the woman who gave birth to me. For 34 years, I had been utterly terrified of her disappointment. I had exhausted my entire soul trying to buy her love, trying to be the perfect, reliable daughter. And looking at her now, demanding extortion money while her bruised, broken daughter held an infant she had refused to protect, the fear completely evaporated. It didn't fade, it just vanished, leaving behind absolute, freezing ice. "No," I said quietly. Eleanor blinked, completely taken aback by the simple one-syllable word. "Excuse me." "I said no, Mom," I repeated, my voice steady and painfully clear. "I am absolutely never giving you another single dime for the rest of my natural life. Not today. Not tomorrow. Never." Chloe loudly scoffed from the counter. "Oh my God, Maya, stop being so incredibly dramatic. You literally make 6 figures. You can easily afford it, and Mom and Dad literally need the money to survive. You are being horribly selfish." "Survive," I echoed, tasting the absolute absurdity of the word. I carefully shifted Lily into David's waiting, gentle arms. Then I reached into the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the massive, thick manila folder Aunt Sarah had given me. I dropped it heavily onto the kitchen table. It made a loud, terrifying slap against the wood. "Let's talk about surviving, shall we?" I opened the cover, revealing the pristine, highlighted forensic spreadsheets. I didn't look at my mother. I looked directly across the room at my father. "Dad, I need you to come here and look at this right now." Arthur looked startled, but he slowly walked over to the table. Eleanor immediately reached out to snatch the folder, her face flashing with sudden, raw panic. "What is that?" "You don't need to show him anything. Maya, this is between us." David effortlessly intercepted her hand, stepping between my mother and the table without saying a single word. His silent, imposing presence completely froze her in her tracks. "Dad," I said softly, ignoring her panic completely. "For the last 9 years, Mom told me that your heart condition required incredibly expensive, out-of-pocket specialists that your insurance wouldn't cover. She also told me that your union pension was drastically slashed and that the bank was actively threatening to foreclose on the house." Arthur's face violently drained of all color. He looked from me to the folder, and then slowly turned his head to look at his wife. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "My pension is absolutely fine. And the house was paid off by my dad years ago. Eleanor told me you just got a big promotion and were sending us a few $100s a month to help with the grocery bills because you wanted to be generous." "I sent $4,500 a month, Dad," I stated coldly, watching the devastating truth land on him like a physical blow. 108 consecutive months. $486,000. I tapped the highlighted columns on the spreadsheet. "Aunt Sarah audited the accounts, Dad. You didn't have critical heart surgery 2 years ago. Mom withdrew $40,000 in cash that exact same week and funneled it entirely into a private account for Chloe to rent a luxury apartment in Miami. The rest of the monthly money, it was withdrawn in massive cash increments from the ATMs inside Rivers Casino." The silence in my kitchen was absolute, deafening, and completely terrifying. Arthur stood completely frozen, staring blindly at the irrefutable, printed numbers in the folder. His hands began to visibly shake. He had been comfortably, willfully blind for decades, letting his wife handle all the complex adult responsibilities so he could live in peace. But the sheer magnitude of the theft, $500,000 stolen directly from his hardworking daughter's future to fund a gambling addiction and a spoiled adult child, was too massive to ignore. "Eleanor," Arthur finally choked out, his voice cracking with a devastation that actually made my chest ache. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't steal $500,000 from our daughter." Eleanor's pristine, composed mask completely, violently shattered. The arrogant general vanished, instantly replaced by a cornered, panicked animal. She started talking incredibly fast, her voice shrill and desperate, trying to weave a net of excuses. "Arthur, you don't understand. The economy has been so difficult. I was investing it. I was trying to win it back for our retirement. And Chloe needed a head start. Maya is completely fine. Look at this massive house. She doesn't even need the money. I did it for the family." "You did it for a slot machine," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her hysterical excuses like a razor blade. "And when I was bleeding in a trauma unit and your infant granddaughter needed someone to keep her safe for a few hours, you chose the casino over her. You told my husband that Chloe's vacation was more important. You didn't do a single thing for this family. You are a parasite." Chloe had entirely stopped texting. She was staring at her mother in sheer horror, not because her mother had lied or stolen, but because the golden goose was officially, permanently dead. "Wait," Chloe stammered, her eyes wide with sudden panic. "Does this mean my credit card isn't getting paid? I have a luxury lease payment due on Friday." I looked at my 30-year-old sister with absolute disgust. "It means you need to go out and get a job, Chloe, because the magical family account never existed. I was the account, and the account is permanently closed." Eleanor completely broke down. She didn't use her theatrical, manipulative cry this time. She used a real, guttural, ugly sob, realizing that the absolute worst-case scenario had just violently detonated in her face. Her husband was looking at her like she was a complete stranger. Her endless supply of stolen money was entirely cut off, and her financial crimes were meticulously documented in a forensic folder sitting on my kitchen table. "Maya, please," she begged, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, reaching out toward me with shaking hands. "Please, I am your mother. You can't just throw me away. I have a sickness. I need help. We are family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked down at my beautiful, innocent daughter resting peacefully in David's arms, entirely unaware of the toxicity rotting in the room. Then I looked back up at the woman who had happily sacrificed my financial future to feed a machine. Family is the people who show up when you are broken. Family is the night nurse who drove 40 minutes at midnight to rock a stranger's baby because her actual grandmother was too busy pulling a lever in a casino. You are not my family, Eleanor. You are just a massive financial liability that I have officially, permanently written off. I pointed directly toward the front door with my good left hand. Leave. Do not ever come back to this house. Do not ever call my phone. If you ever attempt to contact my daughter, I will personally hand Aunt Sarah's forensic accounting file directly to the IRS and file a massive civil lawsuit for fraud. Get out of my house. Arthur didn't say a single word. He didn't defend her. He just turned around, his shoulders completely slumped, looking 10 years older than when he walked in, and silently walked out the front door. Chloe frantically followed him, furiously typing on her phone, already trying to figure out how to salvage her ruined lifestyle. Eleanor stood there for 5 agonizing seconds, violently sobbing, desperately waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to save her from the consequences of her own actions. I just stared back at her with absolute, unyielding ice. Finally, she picked up her designer purse and stumbled out the door. David quietly, firmly pushed the heavy oak door shut behind them, throwing the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click. The social and financial fallout over the next 6 months was absolute devastation for them. Arthur moved out of the house 3 days later, finally finding his spine, and immediately filed for divorce, disgusted by the sheer magnitude of the lies. Eleanor's precious, carefully curated social standing at her country club completely evaporated when the divorce forced the truth about her gambling addiction into the brutal public light. Without my $4,500 a month, she quickly lost her luxury car, was forced to downsize into a tiny, depressing apartment, and had to actually get a minimum wage job working the register at a local retail store. Chloe, suddenly completely cut off from her magical funding, was violently evicted from her luxury Miami apartment and had to move into a cramped roommate situation, taking a job as a barista and constantly complaining on her private social media accounts about how unfair the universe was. As for me, I healed. My ribs knit back together. My arm regained its strength. My incredible daughter, Lily, just celebrated her first birthday surrounded by people who genuinely, fiercely love her. Aunt Sarah comes over for Sunday dinner every single week, and she is the absolute only grandmother Lily will ever need or know. My career is thriving, my marriage is an absolute fortress, and my bank account is finally, beautifully secure. The hardest, most agonizing lesson I ever had to learn was that you absolutely cannot buy a toxic family's love, no matter how much money you violently bleed onto their altar. If someone in your life only ever values you for exactly what you can provide and never for who you actually are, let them figure out how to survive on their own. Close the accounts, stop apologizing for their bad behavior, and fiercely protect your own peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've ever had to set a massive, life-altering financial or emotional boundary with toxic family members, drop a comment below. I read absolutely every single one. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.